All right, hey everyone. Welcome back. I am Ben,
And I am Gage.
and we're Ben-Gage-Ing with the
Ben-Gage-Ing in
Bible.
the Bible.
There we go. Perfect. So I have this is actually a short chapter. We're doing Genesis 4 today. At least it's short in the fact that I didn't have a lot to write about it. So Genesis 4 is mainly the story with like Cain and Abel. So the first death to ever take place, at least after death entered into the world, not including animals, which probably happened a lot right after. So it's a good book. It's like interesting, you know. I remember I heard about this once, and this was before I read the Bible. I actually knew something about this book because there was this meme where it had Super Smash Brothers Genesis, and it had Cain with a rock over his head, getting ready to,
I,
yeah,
I do remember that meme.
yeah. I think I showed you that a long, long time ago.
That yeah.
Yeah,
You are the meme lord.
exactly. I know about all of them before they get there.
Way ahead of the curve.
All right, so verse 1 says Adam made love to his wife Eve, so that's awesome already. You know, they fulfilled God's plan for the greatest thing that he ever created for man.
Yeah,
and
man. That's A plus for Adam.
and they gave birth with to Cain, right? And Cain, his name means like the Hebrew word for like brought forth or acquired. So I think, you know, based on Genesis 3 where they had the messianic prophecy, Eve is like, "Oh, here he is. Here he is." Turns out not him. It's not the Messiah, it's a murderer. So that didn't work out very
Yeah.
well. Unfortunately.
He never said when
Yeah, he never
and
said
which
which man it would
child.
be. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that was interesting is I could not find an exact meaning on Abel's name. So I guess some like translated down into Hebrew while others didn't. Which makes sense. It gives more like credibility to the Bible because it would make sense that you couldn't translate names in whatever language they were using at this time down into Hebrew, which happened after the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, I mean, you can't expect Adam and Eve to like Hebrew wasn't the first language.
Yeah,
It was
true.
God's language. I'd imagine the Holy Spirit's language
Yeah.
was what they were talking in.
Now, we haven't gotten to this yet, so for anybody who's like new to Christianity and just checking this out, one of the things that happens in the New Testament is the gift of tongues, and one thing that has happened is not just human tongues, is angelic tongues, which I feel like that might be the language that was spoken, although not 100% sure on that, because,
That's just how I. That's it makes sense to me, and that's how I always imagined
yeah,
it. I never felt any need to look into it any further, but it
yeah.
makes sense.
I also find it, like, interesting how God, like, didn't like, you know, he didn't tell Eve when. He's like, "Oh no, it's not going to be for a while. Don't name your kid like it's going to happen." You know? I wonder
Oh
why he
yeah, they were
withheld
they
that
were fully
information.
set.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were fully set. Like, oh, this is when it's happening.
Yeah. He should have just
Named it.
said something like it's not going to be the first one, but I feel like there might be a purpose in that, as if like, you know, we get our expectations for like who the Messiah is going to be, and then it turns out it's the wrong person, you know? And you could like
Yeah,
make that little connection with it.
definitely some foreshadowing.
Yeah, the Antichrist. Oh yeah, this is the cool one that I can mention the vampire theory because of Cain. So
Oh yeah, that was the first thing you mentioned. Where we were like, we should do a podcast.
yeah, exactly. And I
The
think it's
vampire
weird when
theory.
you think you're holding the Messiah in your arms and then all of a sudden it turns out to be a murderer. Like, how disappointing would that be? But I also feel like Cain had probably had a lot of high expectations for himself that might have driven him to be more jealous of his brother because he's like, no, I'm the one who my mother told me was the greatest. So why is Abel getting all of the attention? You know?
Yeah, I can't put too much blame on Cain because if I was in his situation, I know for a fact if my mom was convinced I was the Messiah, she wouldn't be quiet about it.
Yeah. So before we get
have that ringing in my ear all the time
True.
about how great and promising my life is going to be.
Oh, that would be the worst.
Yeah.
So, before we get to the murder part, there's like this sequence with two offerings. So, verse 3 says, "In the course of time, Cain brought some fruits of soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor." So, do you know why that is?
So I did some research, and what I gathered was that God expected animal offerings.
Well,
that was something that he expected.
So that's close. See, both grain offerings and animal offerings are acceptable before God, but whenever an animal offering is burned, in order for it to be acceptable to God, the fat of the animal has to be burned in, like, fire, right? Or God will consume the fat of the animal in fire. And also, Abel offered the firstborn of his flock, while Cain it says he gave him some vegetables.
Oh, well, from a non-spiritual standpoint, you can look at both gifts and think, well, one of these is much more sincere and valuable than the other.
True. And, so, okay, I think we already... Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm thinking of things that I need to mention after we get to the crazy part. So, it says Cain was very
angry. I knew you were thinking about vampires.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even that. It was actually Messiah stuff. So, I love how God says to Cain, he's like, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now, God knew exactly what Cain was going to do, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. But I think it's such a good statement without knowing what happens next, because it had nothing to do with God loving Abel more than Cain.
Yeah.
It was Abel did the right thing, Cain didn't. There's no, like, prejudice or bias towards it. It's just the right decision wins every time.
And then I also like how, God knew everything about Cain, but he still offered him, like, a chance to, like, do what was right. He didn't say you couldn't come back later and give me an offering that was acceptable. He just said, "Hey, your brother did what's right. You didn't, but I'm not, like, closing the door. You can come back and do it yourself. You can do it later." And he also warned him about sin before he did it. So.
Oh, yeah. This, God gives a clear warning about how sin is going to take over and basically try to take over him, because he says you have to master sin.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to put it, how you have to master your temptations and the bad influences around you, I guess.
Like, if you don't beat it down and control it, it'll always try to come against you. Like, you can't give it any leverage at all, If something's a temptation to you specifically, because the thing is, everybody struggles with different stuff, right? But if something is more of a temptation to you than anything else, you've got to cut off that thing entirely. Like, if it's drinking, don't go to a bar. Like, if it's porn, like, don't even go on Instagram Reels, according to, what some people report. For me, I just get politics, really. That's all I get. But, a lot of people say that on Instagram and TikTok, they get all women, like, and I'm just like, yep, you gotta stop. Don't look at the Reels. Look at the posts,
It's a scary thing how much those eye trackers on your phone, they know, and how much of the algorithm actually gets from that. So
yeah,
it's a little creepy.
And TikTok is the worst of them all, because TikTok doesn't just do that. They encourage, like, worse things for Americans specifically, compared to if you have it in China and it gives you, like, feats of engineering or creativity and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could. That's obviously true, but in all fairness, the people who you want to be successful aren't the ones on TikTok.
Yeah, true. I don't even think people make money on TikTok, actually. Like, it's just a way to get yourself out there to do something else.
Yeah, that's the big thing. They don't make money from, so they have that creators fund, right?
Oh,
But it's
yeah.
like fractions of pennies that are
Yeah.
accumulated over time. But the big thing is sponsorships. That's where
Yeah.
everybody gets their money from TikTok.
See, at least with YouTube, I get 50%, right?
Yeah, 50% is very generous.
And then I get
YouTube
taxed
is
and
there
not
from the
YouTube
beginning.
for some reason.
You've taxed what?
I get taxed and not YouTube for some reason.
Well, that's what's great about YouTube. It's your own business.
Yeah. But I noticed that specifically channels that are successful a lot will often have to like even open like Patreons and stuff. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, that's weird. I mean, a lot of things get like demonetized for no reason, but that's not a concern for me, right?
I hope not.
Yeah, but
YouTube has definitely gotten a little controversial in
yeah,
how it makes its money and who gets money
yeah.
from their content.
Now, I just watched The Godfather recently, and that brings me into verse 8, because Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. I can't do an Italian voice on the spot. I did like I did like an Irish. Let's go out into the field. Let's go out into the field. I don't know. I'm not good at Italian voices. That's the only thing I can't do. But yeah, I immediately thought of like, hey, let's go for a ride in the car. Let's go down to the lake. Let's go for a walk in the woods, you know? And Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Now, something I find really interesting is that Cain sacrificed the firstborn of his flock, and then Cain was like pretty much, I don't know if he was faultless, but he was killed. You know, I think that kind of foreshadows like the Messiah in a way.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a wrong connection.
Yeah. And I don't know what else we got here. Oh yeah, so one thing I thought about is I was like, okay, how does Cain know that he can kill yet? Because as far as I know, no humans have been killed. But then I remembered, I'm like, oh wait, yeah, Abel like killed his animals for sacrifice, so he probably is like, oh, I saw him do that, I can just do the same thing. So
Yeah, it goes back to your point about Adam, how he was probably the most intelligent man on Earth,
yeah,
just with all the knowledge. So you have to imagine that he gave some of his knowledge, hopefully most of his knowledge, to his kids.
True.
And I'd imagine the concept of death is a pretty important one, especially to get food.
Even then, I feel like Adam probably forgot a lot of stuff. Because if he knew, like, you know, being like a like innocent man, right? You're probably just as intelligent, I guess, or close to it as you would be in heaven, apart from all the hidden revelation that you don't know yet. So I think if you were going to give that kind of like knowledge to somebody who has fallen, like their brain would explode or something like that. You know, it would be too much for them to handle.
Oh yeah, well I don't think Adam knew everything that God did still. I don't think
of course
man
not.
is able. Yeah. So even though he may have I'm just going to agree with you, because once God kind of the relationship with God and Adam and Eve, it separated a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not like he left completely, but it's not on the same level that it was.
Yeah.
You mentioned it yourself, the cloud of the Holy Spirit went away with them, went away from them.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine he didn't retain everything that God said, but he still had to be really smart in order to build humanity.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I feel like that a lot of the intelligence that was gained later, well, we'll get into that, because mainly it has to do with the people who are born later in the chapter. So, verse 9 says, Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? He said, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? And, the thing is, he is supposed to be, though. He's like the older brother. That's his job. That's his only job, like right now. His job is to harvest grain and protect his family. That's his only job. And he failed.
It is the most sassy thing that you could possibly say to God's face. It's just, that is not my job. That is the exact thing he said.
He's like, you know where he is. Right? Or he's like, I don't know what happened.
Super disrespectful.
Or like, you know, when like you say to your kid, like, you know, hey, did you turn the thermostat up? I don't know. Right?
Yeah, they completely know the answer. They're just so disinterested and have no plan on giving you any of their time.
Yeah. I also just noticed, like, the amount of disrespect he gave to God. I feel like that, like, God was not in his, like, glorious form. You know what I mean? Like...
I do know what you mean, because usually when a human being sees God, they tremble in fear.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that certainly happens in the later chapters, not necessarily now.
Yeah.
But I agree. God is not in his purest form, and I don't think he's shown his purest form to any of Adam and Eve's family and descendants since the Garden of Eden.
I think it's like Jesus in his pre-incarnate form. So, like the second person of the Trinity, because I found I think I looked up the verse in the last in one of the previous episodes, but it says something like, no one has seen the Father at any time, right?
I do remember you talking about that.
Yeah.
Either way, he's still the angel of the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And when people saw angels, they were terrified. So I have to imagine there's some kind of dumbed down version that God let Cain see.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you've seen, like, artist depictions of, like, the literal, Jesus, like, he doesn't look that scary, honestly. You know, he looks very...
the one with the fire tongue?
No, I'm talking about the one who's, like, the human Jesus. Like, not the one that the Catholics made art about.
Oh, yeah, he was just a person. I can't imagine he was super scary, which probably ticked off the Pharisees a little bit more, because he was supposed to be like a ferocious warrior. So the fact that he was a simple carpenter was probably really
who could fit
annoying.
on a donkey, by the way. Like who could ride on a donkey?
Like useless, or not useless. Like the most meekest animal. They had camels, man.
Yeah, and
those things are freaking huge.
And there was so basically when Jesus like came out, like his grave wrappings, like you know how they did like a pre-mummification thing. Mm-hmm. His wrappings were actually found, but they were completely like they didn't look like they were ripped out of at all. They were just empty, and they were found. And
like he kind of disintegrated out of his clothes,
or he was a spiritual body, so like how he came through the walls of the building, he probably just went through his clothing, you know?
Right, but the image I get is the Avengers Endgame, the particles floating away, and just he goes into the afterlife.
True. Now, one thing I think about that, or I found out about that, is that Jesus, by his grave wrappings, was like 5'6" or something.
To be fair, everybody was short, man. That's why there was such a large contrast between giants and humans. There were no 7-foot people.
Well, even then, like the giants we've dug up are like 9 feet tall.
Oh yeah, it's still not comparable.
So imagine being David, the shortest of a family of short people, and then having Goliath, like a 9 foot tall or 8 feet tall. Goliath was 8 feet tall, and having that thing come up to you.
That's all it took.
Yeah. Well, those stones that were in the slingshots were actually very, very dangerous. Like they were huge.
Oh yeah, it's not. I love the Sunday school version of that. It's just like a pebble,
like something you find in a parking lot in the middle of the woods.
It's not. Just super like a bird shot kind of slingshot.
Yeah.
But it was a war weapon still, or maybe not a war weapon, but it was still a weapon that people used. It just wouldn't have been somebody's first pick against a giant.
Yeah.
But it was still really it would hurt.
Unless it was the black angry bird.
Oh
In that
yeah,
case,
we don't mess with those. That's
yeah.
what that was a power David didn't want to deal with.
Exactly.
His iPad was charging at that time, so he grabbed his
Yeah.
slingshot.
But it's also weird how like Cain is so like he doesn't. I don't know. He doesn't seem like he's that concerned with God at this, and I think that shows that like he murdered out of a lack of honor of God. Really, if he was afraid of God, he wouldn't have done it. You know.
It's not like there's a super emotional moment, right? Like
Yeah.
when I think of Judas and when he portrays Jesus, right? There's an emotional moment where he just kind of breaks down and he ends up killing himself.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen here. Cain has no remorse for what he's done,
and he doesn't even kill himself. Like later he says, "My punishment is too much for me to bear," as if he's not even concerned about the wrongness of what he did. He just cares about the punishment.
Yeah, it's zero accountability.
Yeah. And verse 10 says, "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And that's basically the first origin of like capital punishment, I guess, being called for. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because it's like saying that the blood
I think it does.
of like victims of murder cries out to God and like poisons a land, right? Like, I mean, even look now, like the death penalty has seen a rapid decrease, right? In the past, like even couple of years. And I just checked recently in 2021 in Philadelphia, there were over 1,300 shootings.
It's a lot.
And barely any of those people are getting the death penalty. Right?
I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I'm just surprised by that. Because, I don't know.
See, I struggle with that too, because God has that moment of the prostitute, right? About throwing the stones.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, man. In some situations, I have a hard time believing the death penalty is wrong. In other times, I'm thinking and just looking at the situation like you're taking away something that God created, you know?
Yeah.
Even though they did the same thing,
I
think we might be at a different time than habeas corpus. I don't know.
Now, so when Jesus actually talked to like not the prostitute, she was an adulterous woman, right? The thing to keep in mind about that is that in order to have a capital punishment case, you would need 2 witnesses. And in each case that Jesus didn't really step in the way, but didn't advocate for it, was only because the law was being applied improperly. Because the one thing about the adulterous woman is that there was no man present, right? And if it was adultery...
it was very much like witch trial type of things, where it was bad law. Now,
when the death penalty... I'm sure the death penalty was used properly, like, at that time also. But the death penalty is such a rarity because it requires witnesses, right? And it was basically meant to restrict punishment the way it was practiced. So the death penalty is not really a bad thing. It's just there's a proper place and a proper time to use it. And when Jesus condemned the Pharisees, they weren't using it at the proper place or the proper time.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like I said, that's something I just think about. There's not something I've given like a solid stance on, because I have to agree. I don't think the death penalty is just a clean slate. We can't have it anymore. So
and one thing about Jesus in that situation was he said, like, whoever has not sinned, cast the first stone. He was talking about that situation, right? Because obviously in the history of Israel, there are people who've committed sin before who have thrown stones at people righteously, like according to the law. But he's obviously referring to, in that situation, they all sinned by even bringing her before him to ask him, right?
Right.
Because otherwise, like, that wouldn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean? Everybody who's ever dealt justice righteously has sinned before, apart from God, right? Mm-hmm. So how would you...
No, because I know we talked about it in pretty much every episode, but the Bible and God never contradicts itself.
Yeah.
So
Now, as
He can't make a claim like that.
yeah, now Christians though, we should definitely prefer like rehabilitation if possible over the death penalty. Cause like I even notice a lot of times how before people like actually get like the death penalty, they actually find Jesus, but still like we pray that they find Jesus, which is the most important thing, right? But however, the system of the death penalty is not an unjust system, you know? And like if I were to go crazy enough to like murder a bunch of people, I definitely would want to get the death penalty on me, even though I am a believer and I would be confident later in heaven. I'm just like, no, this has to be done, you know? To honor God. That's what it has to be for.
Yeah, and that's why it's the death penalty, right? You don't
Yeah.
have the prisoner kind of, they don't kill themselves.
Yeah.
They can plead guilty,
Yeah.
but they are not killing themselves. It's a punishment. It is specifically a punishment.
Yeah. And it's like it's not murder either, because in the law, like the terms in Aramaic, which is like the Hebrew language, for kill and murder are not the same. So when the Catholics translated it to thou shalt not kill, that's actually an improper translation of it. It's really thou shalt not murder. And even then they don't even really use thou, but it's murder. Murder and kill are not the same thing in the Bible. Killing can be done righteously, while murder is like killing someone out of hate and not out of justice or by accident.
Oh yeah, that's. If it said "Thou shalt not kill," dude, God has used death and killing so many times to do righteous acts.
What about all those ants I stepped on? Am I going to hell?
Right?
Man, but like that's the whole point. Is like it has to be taken. Like scripture has to be interpreted in totality. You can't like pick and choose what parts you like and then what parts you don't. It all has like a purpose for being written. But still, pray for your enemies, but also pray that proper justice is done that honors God at the same time.
Definitely.
So let's see what else we got. So God said in verse 10, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work at the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." So that's where the whole vampire theory comes in, you know? He's like, he's a restless wanderer. What? And that was a really interesting theory because it also brings in another biblical figure called Lilith, which I don't know how old Lilith is, but it's not like one of those Mary Magdalene things where it was written 400 years after the gospel was written. Like, no, that was about the same time, but it's been debated whether or not it was like actually accurate, which looking at it, I don't really think so. But Lilith was, supposedly the first woman in the garden before Eve, and she was made out of the dust of the earth as Adam was, and she sought to rule over him, and she eventually became tempted by Satan, and then became the mother of demons, if that makes sense. And a lot of people think that one of the first people, like a lot of crazy people, I should say. I don't believe in vampires, but a lot of people with differing opinions from my own have said that Lilith and Cain were like the parents of vampirism, and I'm just like, okay, that's a little far. But the reason
really like Twilight, but want to connect it to
now the reason is because in I think it was in either Jeremiah or Isaiah. I'll have to pull up the verse. I'll put it in the show notes probably. But it was about at the end of days when Israel was like destroyed or something. Like it was an end times prophecy, and it said creatures of the night was one of the terms they used in that. And if you were gonna like translate it, it translates to little Liliths.
That is pretty wild.
Yeah. I thought that was like, oh my goodness, they might be right. I still don't believe in vampires, but they could be right. I don't know.
Feels like the name could be real. Like somebody, like Lilith was real, but like
yeah.
the idea of vampires
Yeah.
doesn't feel biblical
No.
to an extent, but I don't know.
I mean, unless they were like one of those things like the demons corrupted, like you know how giants were there. But if there were vampires, I don't think they'd be immortal, because that's like God wouldn't allow that, you know.
Yeah, oh my goodness. But no, the Hollywood idea of a vampire, there's
No.
yeah.
Yeah. There is a cool thing though. Specifically, I was like reading the Silmarillion again, right? And they're like the spirits of the Maiar, which are pretty much like angels, and they can take any form they want. And I think it was an interesting creative decision that Sauron in the First Age, who's like the Dark Lord of the Third Age, when he could shapeshift, he took the form of a vampire, right? But even then, the vampires in Tolkien's works weren't like our vampires. They're more like what I would think a demon would like transform into to scare people and cause superstition kind of vampires, you know? So I don't think that people, for example, could be vampires if they were real. I feel like it would just be a facade that demons like would use maybe a long time ago to fool people. Because, you know, that's more believable than thinking that humans can become blood-sucking demons. But who knows? They're giants. I just think it's an interesting topic to talk about. And I probably shouldn't consider it that much, considering that the first person I talked to that I met who believed that was also an astrology freak. So I'm like, uh-oh, get away from that.
You love bashing astrology.
Oh, so much.
Not that I don't, but
Yeah. Now,
you have a special taste for bashing.
Yeah. I mean, last time we actually did have a reason for that, is because in Genesis it mentions that the stars in the sky are supposed to be for signs and seasons, and that constellations, like the varying different shapes, are all, like, consistent among every culture on Earth, right? Which leads to, like, a pre-Tower of Babel, like, mapping of constellations that was probably agreed upon. Because you look at the stars in the sky, and you look at the constellation map, you're like, what? How did they get this? You know? But it's the same, like, from the Mayans to, like, the Mesopotamians, it's all the same.
Yeah, there's nobody had a different way of reading a map, I guess, or creating a map.
And then in Kings, or no, it was Samuel. In 1 Samuel, it said that, like, astrology was a corruption, right? So I'm thinking, like, oh, yeah, that does make sense, because if you were going to turn something into worship, like, to push forth an agenda, why not something that's clearly already divine, right?
Oh, yeah, it's a great tactic.
Yeah. So...
And, I just want to bring this one point really quick.
Yeah.
God says to use the stars for science and mapping like that.
Yeah.
So that's why astrology, that's the bad one.
Yeah.
Astronomy
is great. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's not super spiritual.
Yeah.
I guess it could be for some people.
Yeah.
But that's just a strictly science-based outlook on our solar system.
I feel like astronomy, how God would want it, would just be like studying the stars with the knowledge that, like, you're studying what God made, and it's cool to, like, revel in the new, like, discoveries and, like, just gazing upon it, you know? Not worshipping it, but, you know, gazing upon it and looking at the fingerprint of the Creator. That's, like, the whole idea, I feel like, behind those verses.
Absolutely, yeah. It wasn't trying to say that the stars were him.
Yeah.
Like, they were godly. It's another thing I made.
Although Jesus is called, like, the morning star, which I think is really interesting, because whenever people think of the morning star, they think of Lucifer, right? But Lucifer is actually the Latin term for morning star, and that was a term used to describe Jesus, not Satan.
That is interesting.
Yeah. I asked Will about that, too, and I was like, that's how I originally found it out, and then I did my own research, and I found out that he was right, is that it was actually meant to focus on Jesus, not Lucifer. And the morning star, of course, is Venus. Like, that's the planet that's known as the morning star.
I did know, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not talking about the sunrise.
Yeah. So, so when we mentioned the punishment earlier, how Cain cared about the punishment, verse 13, it says, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me.
Yeah, that's almost he, and we know what happens next, so it's kind of easy to draw conclusions. But
yeah,
he almost, this is a mocking of God. Like he goes,
yeah,
this punishment, I'm gonna die anyway. Why would this is a dumb thing to do to me?
I never thought about it in like a sarcastic tone, but now that I've heard it said that way, it actually makes a lot of sense. And one thing is that, like, I think the reason that God kept Cain alive is because there were so few people on the earth, but he had to, like, curse him in some way instead of the death penalty. So it makes sense that he would do that.
Yeah, he's still he's still building humanity, right?
Yeah.
He can't just kill off the first people on Earth.
Yeah.
He wants to create generations and have people learn from their father's sins.
Yeah. So it says, but the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. I think it's weird that it doesn't even mention the mark. Like, what is the mark? What does it look like?
Yeah, it was just a universal mark that everybody was like, whoa, don't go by that guy.
Yeah.
But we have no... God doesn't explicitly say what the mark was.
That's where the vampirism theory comes from. You know, that's like, because that was a theory about it. There are tons of theories on what the mark was. I haven't read all of them, but I remembered the vampire one specifically because I thought, like, wow, that's the most interesting, you know?
It's definitely interesting.
Yeah. He could have just put, like, I don't know, nowadays I feel like if you want to scare someone away from killing you, or, like, just put, like, an upside-down cross that glows red on somebody's body. You're like, get away from him! You know?
That's what's so interesting about this mark. It's not scaring people away.
Yeah.
It's just letting them know, don't kill this person. But it also isn't putting Cain on a pedestal. Like, the way that God describes this mark is not that Cain is special, don't kill him.
Yeah.
It's just people are fearful of the punishment that God would give them if they killed Cain, right? Because Cain still has a family after this. So it's not like he's just walking around with this horrible mark that makes him an outcast from society. That's not really what that mark is doing.
My favorite theory was that God's mark on Cain was like, hey, don't kill this guy. Lord God, mightiest. Have a good one.
Just written on his forehead?
Yeah, something like that. He's like, yeah, this one's a jerk. Just don't kill him, please. God. You know?
That is a great thing to look at. Because then it's not even... People are scared of him. People aren't even scared of the letter that's on his forehead. They just read it and go, all right, I guess I'm not going to kill him.
Yeah.
They just spit on him and throw rocks at him.
True.
They don't kill him, but they really, really mess with him.
Yeah. So then it says, Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, to the east of Eden. Now, I couldn't find out what Nod means. I just said it. It says it means wandering.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. I wonder if Nimrod, like the name of the guy who founded Babel, has something to do with Nod. Because it sounds kind of similar, I guess.
It's possible. It might have some roots.
Yeah. And then it says, Cain made love to his wife, who was his sister, by the way. I just wanted to point that out. You know, it was an early time.
Just point that out.
No, but one thing, though, is that it wasn't written in the law that sibling with that stuff was sin yet, because obviously the world needed to populate. Which is actually crazy to think about, because that would mean that only after Deuteronomy was written was that actually a sin.
Well, so here's the thing. It is such a weird concept to us because we know that deformities are extremely likely. when incest happens,
Yeah.
right? It almost makes me believe more in God and how he created humanity.
Yeah.
Because DNA has to be so different back then,
Yeah.
right? The DNA we have can't look like their DNA, or else
Oh.
there would just be a bunch of deformed people
Well,
who
actually,
die.
I have a theory about that. So, you know how in like our society today, like everybody is like I'm not just like German, I'm like a ton of different things, right? So back then, I
Sure.
actually feel like they were more similar, right? Because I think if they were just one thing each and they reproduced, that child would be one thing, and then their possible deformity, I guess, or not deformity, but like change, would that they would be branching off into another thing depending on where they are geographically. Now, the reason that I think it's today is because all of us have so many things running through us that even if somebody is our direct sibling, all of that other stuff gets confused genetically and then will reproduce like some kind of freaky looking thing, you know? I didn't want to say abomination because that's a little harsh, and especially the Habsburgs might come after me. The royal families in Europe.
I don't think they're coming after you, man.
Yeah.
I think you're all right.
Yeah. I'm just like, Prince Harry's at my door.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Sorry. You're a cool guy.
They're coming after you now, man.
Yeah. Pray for me. Okay. So this says, then Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. So he didn't name it after God, he named it after another human, you know?
Yeah, Cain clearly still resents God, which I guess makes sense. It's not good,
Yeah.
but it's not out there.
Oh, also, I want to point out that this Enoch is not the same Enoch that is the one that was mentioned in the book of Enoch.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Different.
That would be a much crazier book if that was the Enoch. Well, I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
like, it would be different.
No, it would be pretty crazy because it would. That's a whole other meaning would be given to that story.
Yeah. It says, to Enoch was born Arad, and Arad was the father of Mehujael, I think you say that, and Mehujael was the father of Methushael, which, you know what? El at the end of a name in Hebrew means, like, angelic. Like, you know how Gabriel, like, I don't know if they were children, because it doesn't give us a timeline, right? So, we don't know that if, at this time, the sons of God or the angels were, like, you know, interacting and, like, having children with men yet. So this could have very well, since people were living a very, very long time back then, so this could have very well been, like, the time, in genealogy at least, when the sons of God, like, started having the Nephilim, and that's why their names sound angelic. But I'm not sure.
It's possible. I also think it might be. It doesn't say it explicitly, but I think Irad might have some
Radical
resentment
beliefs?
for either his grandfather Cain or his father Enoch.
Yeah.
Because it's a angelic name, right?
Yeah.
It sounds and it's a lot more godly, right?
Yeah.
With the EL and I know the M's are very. That was a thing as well. I can't remember why, but that's just. It seems like Irad might have had differing priorities from Cain. At least it seems like there's development in this family bloodline.
Yeah, but like we don't know none of it, right? That's the.
Oh yeah, it's just a theory.
Yeah, I feel like God just did this to like establish, you know, what happened. Like he's like, yeah, you don't need to know much about these guys. They aren't important to my story. But yeah, they're kind of like I don't know. They're like when somebody lists all of these made up places, you know? Except they aren't made up, they're real people. That's the difference.
Yeah, I think that's why we see a few of these bloodline just listings, right?
Yeah.
Because if this was a fake story, right?
Yeah.
Then when information gets out about it,
Yeah.
it's going to be it's going to be proven wrong, right?
True.
So the more detailed and more useless information is given, the more credibility it has.
Yeah.
Because we know it's true. So
Yeah.
the more information we have about the past,
Yeah.
then the more credible it is, like I said.
True. And so, and actually, I haven't been able to find any meaning behind their names besides assumptions. So the L is the only thing I know. The only person who I knew was actually, like, who I looked up and was able to actually find their names was in verse 19. So it says Methushael was the father of Lamech, and Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. And I actually found out their names, which are very, very man-centered, actually. So, Zillah means, like, shade, which is referring to her hair, so, like, valuing a human characteristic. And then his daughter's named, their daughter's name, later was Nama, which means loveliness, and then Adah, his other wife, meant pleasure. So there's, like, the first account also of polygamy.
Yeah.
Oh, I actually have Lamech. Lamech may mean conqueror.
Interesting.
So, that's interesting.
Totally.
Yeah, and then Lamech married 2 women. Yeah, we got that. His brothers, or Ada gave birth to Jabal. Or Jabal. I don't know how you say Habal. I think that would be the Hebrew way to say it. See, I'm used to the Yabal, which would be how Norse people would translate a J. But yeah, it's probably an H, because something like that. So it says, he was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. So it says his brother's name was Jubal, or Yubal, I think. I'll just say it like that. I don't know. And he was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. And Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. So I noticed that, and I was thinking of, specifically in the Book of Enoch, it mentions that demons, or the Watchers, which were pretty much these angels that, the ones that had the sons of God, they were the ones who taught man, like, metalwork and things like that. Like the fallen angels. And also, it mentions that another one taught them astrology instead of astronomy.
Right. So, yeah, you were talking about that in the last session as well.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely interesting. And, wait, what does this say? It says... Oh, it just has different meanings for, like, how the sentence would be. It isn't, like, super crazy. So, let's see. So Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. So, now they're like...
See, this is a different reaction to Cain's, though. This is a dread thing. It seems like he's dreading it, right?
Well, no, he's talking about... He's bragging. Like, he's bragging about it.
Yeah, I totally read that backwards.
Yeah.
I don't know how I did that.
So he's, like, saying, like, hey, I bet I did worse than Cain, and that's such a cool thing, right? That's pretty much what he's saying. He's like that guy who goes on to, who shares all the Live Leak links in the Discord chat, you know? Don't go to Live Leak anyway if you're watching this. It's
terrible idea.
Yeah, I've never visited that website personally, but I know what's on there, and I'm not going on.
I have no reason to visit Live Leak.
Yeah, but I do know people who tried to share stuff like that before, and, like, that's the kind of people who I feel like Lamech represents. He's like, yeah, murder is cool, you know? Like, I'm a crazy person. I'm a lunatic. That's pretty much who he is. And it shows just how bad, like, humanity has gotten, right, at this point.
I think he's embracing the fact that even though God doesn't give him that mark, but he's expecting this immortality to come from killing somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. He likes the idea of killing somebody, and he thinks that there's like power in it, right?
And it's even weird. It doesn't mention that any of these people died or how long they lived, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why another, like, that brings more credibility. Oh, I say credibility to the people who believe the vampire theory is like, hey, if they weren't immortal, why does it not say when they died, right? I'm just like, I still don't believe in the vampire thing, but you got a point. Maybe if they were real, I'm pretty sure the Catholics would have wiped them out through their hysterical like persecution, but who knows?
Yeah, that would have been something the Catholics would have been right on top of.
Yeah. No, and then imagine like some dude from like the 1400s comes back to now, and he's like, "Hey, this is the head of a vampire. I told you, we were right in what we did." Like, oh, sorry. No, it's not.
You know what? Fair enough.
Yeah. But like the things that man, that's just crazy. Catholic history is a whole nother thing we can cover. There's definitely a lot on that. I don't really know if there's like a specific book you could read on that though, personally.
No, you'd have to narrow down to a topic.
Yeah. And so verse 25 says, Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. So I notice Adam and Eve are still alive right now, so it's probably not that Cain is immortal, you know?
Yeah, it's it's not like he's outliving people. It's just everybody lived a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So you got to meet your great-great-grandparents, and it was like a normal occurrence.
That's weird, isn't it?
It is really weird. Imagine being able to just have dinner or have a catch. Like, this is a healthy man who's still having a child.
Or in Cain's case,
you could play.
Yeah. Or in Cain's case, go on a raid.
Grandfather.
You know? Or if you're Cain's family, you can go on a raid and just destroy a bunch of villages. But you know,
to each their own.
There's good ones.
Everybody has their pastimes.
Yeah, like I would not want to meet Cain's family. I'm just like, oh come on, there were only like 2 families I could have been born into on the earth, and it was this one, right?
I guess that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and then it says Adam made love to his wife again. She gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. I don't know if there's like condemnation in Cain in that, or if she's like sorrowful. Like that's why I wish there was tones in that we could pick up.
Yeah, because sometimes the Bible does have tones and how people said things, but here it doesn't. She just said that she's talking, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to keep imposing like possibilities.
Yeah.
I want to just kind of take it as it is. So I think she's kind of not even. It's not any kind of emotion, right? It's just her explaining that she's grateful that God gave her something that was almost taken away. That's kind of the way I see it, right?
She's probably just really happy, honestly. I think it's more of like joy is like, oh my goodness, I've gotten another child in place of Abel, you know?
Yeah, not trying to like replace Abel, but like
a
right has been wronged in a way.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And so Enosh, I didn't get any information on Enosh at all, but it does mention like a revival, right? After Seth was born and his family came about. And at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord, which pretty much means like it's a spiritual revival.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like Cain's family of like violence and stuff had their like fun time for a while. And then Seth comes in and tries to do what is right. And his family tries to, heal the hurts of what Cain did. Although he's definitely not the Messiah. And they're not perfect. But they're better than Cain. Like,
It is interesting to see that in order to get the revival, Adam and Eve had to have another kid. It didn't come from Cain's bloodline, right?
Yeah.
It had to go back to the origin.
Yeah, because God's like, I don't want to do my plan through a bunch of people who have been murdering people, so have another kid, please. Right? But that is weird to think about just how age is different. And we went over this in Genesis 1. Specifically how at that time like there was a bunch of different factors that would contribute to human longevity, Like before the flood, like everything was like a perfect temperature. There was no dark energy coming from space that like radiation and stuff that could enter through the atmosphere because of the firmament and all of that stuff. So there's actually a lot of reason beyond like the after effects of the tree of life to also not die from sickness or death, like disease, as quickly.
Yeah, and it just goes back to the point that science supports God. It doesn't deny it, right?
Yeah.
Because even though there could be a scientific explanation to why people lived long, it's just, yeah, God said that he was
Yeah.
that he was there.
Yeah, and like another thing that's crazy is that if you were to take a scientific viewpoint on everything that was said and try to relate it to like, okay, why is this happening? You can get a pretty good explanation for it. You know, it's not like science is absent from any of this. Especially with like supernatural elements involved too. Like you have to take into account that there was a tree of life and a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then once you pretty much accept that and accept that there's a God, all of the science makes sense. All of the science fits with everything, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And the science that doesn't make sense is usually wrong and like a skewed kind of data.
Yeah.
So it actually makes you filter out the truth a lot easier when your foundation is there.
I wonder when the Ice Age happened, actually. Because that was like... We don't really learn that.
It happened after the flood, right?
Well, I would assume so. Yeah, because like everything would be tropical before the flood.
Yeah.
But another thing is that Noah, right? He existed in like the ark landed on Mount Ararat, right? Which is in Armenia. So I don't think the Ice Age wouldn't have reached there or the places that are mentioned later. Because obviously Babylon is far away from it.
Like the northern half of the world that it reached the hardest. It hit the hardest, at least.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've reached this chapter. It was this was actually the shortest episode we've done. I've checked. So I was right. It was still long, but it was the shortest one we've done.
I liked that one, though. I like that chapter. It's a small chapter, but I like it. It's a good one.
What was your favorite passage? Like if you had one.
Favorite, just from this chapter, just a line or something?
Yeah, just a line or anything.
I'm gonna be honest. It's probably Lamech talking about how the one who kills me will be punished 77 times.
Yeah, like that was my favorite too, and I'm just like, oh my goodness.
Not in a good way, but...
Yeah, well, that was the one that stood out the most for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones was either the Mark, or for interesting reasons, not for like, not like good favorite reasons, is the first mention of polygamy, because I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like that was the first time anybody went against God's like ordained purpose of marriage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was people like to make the argument about how there were multiple wives in the Bible, and it's like, yeah, but God wasn't about it.
Like, dude, the murderer's children were the first people to do that, right?
Yeah. Does that not give you a clear picture of where God stood on the idea of multiple or polygamy?
Now, I would say the most hopeful like verse, and probably my actual favorite, like if I had to like choose, would be the very last verses, because it like leaves on a hopeful note. Like, it mentions like the first revival. It says at that time people began to call on the name of the Lord,
Absolutely. That's the one I would want to remember.
Yeah.
It's the good news.
Like that's the one that you'd like, I don't know if it's one of those like white mother like kitchen things, when they get, I don't know what they're called, like kitchen signposts. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's one reason I was, I'm kind of glad I didn't come from a Christian background, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to look at those things. I like having like multiple calendars.
Strictly stats and organization. There's no need for decorations.
Exactly. Or like, I like to have like a ton of Lord of the Rings stuff up, like behind me, or...
That's understandable.
Or Oh my goodness, the light's in the way, but I have a giant Lord of the Rings banner over there, so it's great.
All right, sick.
But yeah. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed Genesis chapter 4. Well, short, but also awesome. So there's a ton of cool stuff. I am Ben.
And I am Gage.
And we have been Ben-Gage-Ing with the Bible. Have a good one. Be blessed.
Very true.